The wind hit her face hard, as if it wanted to push her back home. Each step was an effort against the ice, which covered everything around. The snow crunched beneath his heavy boots, and his scarf was already stiff with ice. It was another ordinary day in Yakutia, Siberia, the coldest village on Earth. The thermometer read 71 degrees, but there was no choice. She needed to follow the trail to her grandmother's house, taking some supplies. Even though I was used to the cold since I was little, that day felt different. The air was thicker, the heaviest silence. My entire body hurt from the impact of the wind, and my nose could barely feel anything anymore. But she didn't stop. The landscape was white, infinite, trees covered in snow, the sky gray, and the breath freezing in the air like thick vapor. My fingers, even inside my gloves, were beginning to tingle. The cold in Yakutia was not just a climate. He was a constant enemy who watched every movement, waiting for any oversight, and she knew it. So he kept his eyes firmly on the path. It was then that he saw something strange up ahead. Small, dark, out of place in stark white. He thought it was a branch, or perhaps a piece of fabric carried by the wind. But as he approached, he felt a tightness in his chest. It wasn't any object. It was an animal, lying down, curled up, almost buried by the snow that gradually covered him. He stopped there, his heart racing. Her body wanted to keep moving, but something in her wouldn't let her. She crouched down carefully, even though her knees throbbed from the cold. He brushed off the snow with his gloved hands, revealing a small fox. The hair has already hardened, eyes half closed, and a slight, almost imperceptible movement in the chest. She was still alive. The ice stuck to her snout, and her body shook so weakly that it was almost invisible. It was as if the cold had taken away everything but that last breath of life. The girl stood there, silent. He felt his own skin burn through his clothes, but he didn't move. Those eyes, even though they were turned off, still asked for help. And there, in the middle of the frozen forest of Yakutia, where the cold had already taken so much away, she couldn't just turn away. The wind picked up, dragging more snow onto the road. Visibility began to disappear, but she didn't move. The left hand held the bag with the deliveries. The right hand rested lightly on the fox's body. He was still breathing. Weak, but he was breathing. And now, the decision she made could change everything. If you want, I can continue with the next part of the story following the structure. Do you want me to skip ahead to the dilemma? She hugged the fox to her chest, trying to give off some heat with her own body. The scarf he wore over his face now wrapped around the animal, and the cold seemed even more cruel without it. His fingers were beginning to fail, and the air that entered his lungs hurt, but she wouldn't let go. In the middle of that endless snow, all that mattered was saving that life. The wind didn't stop. And you, could you face this cold for a defenseless animal? Comment here what winter is like in your city. She knew that every second standing there could be dangerous. The cold entered through the seams of the clothes, burning the arms, the legs, the back of the neck. His breathing came in short, heavy breaths, as if the air was becoming denser. The fox trembled almost imperceptibly. She looked around, but everything was white, shapeless, directionless. The trails used by Yakutia residents quickly disappear in the wind. On days like this, even sled dogs get lost. The body was already showing warning signs. His feet burned inside his boots, and his fingertips began to throb, as if they were going to disappear. He thought about leaving the fox there and following, but her eyes couldn't let go anymore. A lifetime in that cold taught you that you can't survive alone. That's what the older people always said. When someone is down, you help them, even if the world freezes around. Decided to load. He tied the bag on his shoulder, wrapped the fox in his coat, hugging it to his chest, and began to walk. The weight made it difficult. The muscles complained. Each step seemed deeper, slower. The trail disappeared, and she walked guided only by memory. The sky was already starting to darken, and she knew that if the temperature dropped further, her chances would decrease. He remembered what his grandmother said. The cold of Yakutia tests you. It shows who you are. The wind picked up, stirring up swirls of snow. She couldn't see more than a meter ahead, but it didn't stop. The fox was still breathing, and as long as she breathed, she wouldn't let go. The snow was now hitting her face, fine as sand and fast as arrows. Each gust made the body sway, and the eyes could barely stay open. My eyelids were already heavy, with ice crystals forming on the lashes. The damp scarf had frozen solid, and she could barely feel her nose. The fox was still against his chest, protected by the only warm part left. The coat now open let the cold invade mercilessly. The fingers on my hands began to stiffen. Even with thick fur gloves, she could no longer close her fists. He tried to concentrate on the sound of his own footsteps, but everything around him was wind. No sound of birds, no distant sleigh, no living soul. Just the howl of the storm and the feeling that the earth had disappeared beneath your feet. He tried to remember the right direction, but the trail was completely gone. No fences, no branches, no landmarks left by local hunters. The world seemed to spin. I felt my legs giving out and my air running out. The body began to slow down, as if it wanted to sleep standing up. I knew what that was. The ancients called it white sleep, when the cold wins and the body slowly gives up. I needed shelter. I needed it quickly, but there was no sign of anything. Just white, just wind. Just the sound of your own heart beating hard, trying to keep your consciousness alive. The fox was motionless, but he was still breathing, and that was enough for her to take another step, and then another, even without knowing where he was, even without knowing if I would be able to get there. The dark outline appeared in the white mist like a whisper of hope, small, crooked, almost erased by time. An old cabin made of stacked logs, its roof covered in snow, and its windows sealed with thick ice. The residents of Yakutia spoke of these forgotten buildings in the middle of the forest, left by hunters who spent seasons in the extreme cold. Her legs wobbled at the sight of that shadow. The feeling of shelter reignited something in my chest. He accelerated as best he could, his body already staggering, and stopped in front of the wooden door darkened by frost. He tried to turn the lock, but it was sealed, frozen, impossible to open with his already hardened hands. He took 2 steps back, and, with the little strength he had left, he threw himself against the wood. The impact made his shoulder hurt, but the door gave way with a sharp click. He stumbled in, falling to his knees on the rough wooden floor. The smell of old wood, dust, and soot filled his nose. It was dark, but there were still scraps of firewood in the corner and a small iron furnace in the center of the hut. He dropped the bag, laid the fox carefully on an old cloth, and ran to the furnace. His hands were shaking too much to reach for the lighter in his pocket. Tried once, twice, 3 times. The sparks came out weakly, but on the 4th attempt, the flame caught. He placed pieces of thin wood and blew slowly, as he had learned from his grandmother. The fire grew timid, then strong, illuminating her face and the fox's snout. Smoke rose from the open chimney. He took off his gloves, opened his coat, and placed the fox next to the fire, wrapped in his own scarf. The animal's eyes were still closed, but its chest was moving. And there, inside that shelter lost at the end of the world, she felt something pulsate again. The heat from the furnace was beginning to overcome the harshness of the cold. The previously hostile environment was gradually transformed into a refuge of silence and hope. She sat down next to the fox, her hands still shaking but now warm. His face burned, as if coming back to life after hours of being frozen inside. Time seemed to stand still inside, while the wind still howled outside, pushing the snow against the cabin walls. Shadows danced on the wood in the firelight, and the smell of smoke mingled with the slow sound of the animal's breathing. For a moment, she thought everything would stay like this, still, undefined. But then, with a slight movement, the fox moved its paws. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her heart beat faster. She leaned over, pulled the scarf lightly, and saw the animal's eyes slowly open. They were small, dark eyes, shining with the reflection of the flame. The fox didn't run away. He didn't try to move away. He just looked at her, as if he understood. There was no sound, no gesture, no noise between the two, just heavy breathing and shared heat. She reached out slowly and touched the top of the animal's head. It was soft, still damp, still fragile. The connection that was born there didn't need words. In Yakutia, where cold is the law, bonds are formed in silence. She knew that. That day she had done more than just survive. He had defied the impossible. He had carried a life in the midst of white death. I had chosen to care, even when everything told me to run. And outside, the world was still freezing. But inside that hut lost in the ice, 2 creatures shared the heat that still existed. And you, in the middle of a storm at 71 degrees C, would you leave someone behind? The fire was still crackling slowly when she leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes for a moment. The fox, now cuddled up next to her, was breathing more heavily. Outside, The world was still covered in ice, but inside, there was warmth, life, and an instant of peace. Stories like this happen in silence, in the bitter cold of Yakutia. If this moment touched you, comment here about your city and what winter is like there. Subscribe to the channel and send this story to someone who believes in the power of compassion.